Hey there. Welcome to the NPC Sports Podcast. We are back at full strength with our A team. We got Dakota back from the land of the old world. And Logan is also with us as well from the basement compound. Um, Dakota, did you get your fill of football over there in Europa? How was your time in the sunny land of, where'd you go? You went
Uh,
Italy, you went the Mediterranean?
no, yeah, I spent the entire 10 days in Italy. It was great. A lot of carbs. Um, it kind of booped around. We did some in the Amalfi Coast, then a day in Rome. I'm pretty upset that I wasn't there the day the Pope died. That would have been a pretty crazy day. Would have been interesting. Then we
Were you
spent a
there
few
the day
days.
JD Vance visited him?
Yeah, right. Are you gonna move that power drill back or what, John?
I knew that was going to be the first thing you were going to ask, and I've been prepared for this. It has moved many times, and like I said, that's where that bag lives. So it is by design that it's still there, as is the drill.
Jesus. Yeah, but then we spent a few days in central Italy, which is my personal favorite, and then did Venice for the first time, and it was great. It was great. As I was telling you guys before the show, got really sick the last day, so that sucked. Um, but we're good. I'm good, and I'm back.
Well, I think as you were saying before we started streaming and recording, you hate NFL draft talk and you've been kind of out of the loop because of your trip. So this should be a really great episode because all we're going to talk about is the NFL draft here today.
Well, I
Uh,
hate the
so
content, but like, I mean, like anybody else, like I can't help but like just like consume it anyway. Like you can't really avoid it unless you turn off your phone. Like there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, I read the name Will Campbell like 50 times a day, and I'm not trying to. So like
Yeah,
I don't want to
I
know what's
I
going on, but I do know what's going on.
I think that's where it's important to make the distinction. Here's our behind the keyboard. I think it's important to make the distinction that while we are familiar with the draft prospects, we will not pretend that we've watched every single Boise State game to get a good feel of Ashton Gianti. So it always irritates me. Like, how many, Dakota, you could probably give a good educated guess on this. How many people who are like serious mock draft people do you think are actually like dialed into the college football thing? It's like there are a large subset of those people. But when you get beat reporters and people like that doing it, it's like these are people who are dialed into the NFL, not college football. So I think that's always an important caveat that it's a
Yeah.
limited view in some ways.
Yeah, I don't think anybody knows what they're talking about. I think even the people that watch all the film and pour into the film, like those people become so obsessed with the college film and they become so obsessed with certain prospects that they're so into that they form biases. And like they'll just like
Yeah.
say every prospect's amazing and the Patriots or whoever should go after everybody. And the reality is like even the people who are like the most respected, the Daniel Jeremiah's, the Dane Bruglers, who they know a ton of stuff about these guys. At the end of the day, nobody knows like how a guy is going to translate into a scheme. Nobody really knows what they're like off the field, what their football character is like. It's just one giant dart throw. And I find it to be just a colossal, colossal waste of time. But you just like,
But
it's
off we
just where we
go.
are. Like, you have to do it. And if you're running like a news website, like, you have to do it.
Yeah.
My previous job, Pro Football Network, the thing that kept the lights on there, if they're watching this, the thing that kept the lights on there was their mock draft simulator, which is what those are, those tools you can go in and make a mock draft. Like you looked at the traffic things every day, and that thing was like responsible for 95% of it, and it was a huge revenue driver. And like people, fans, media, whatever, people love mock drafts. I don't get it, but they do.
the other thing about the reporting that I think is interesting, and some of the insiders are more self-aware of it than others, but like also all the reporting that you hear related to pre-draft stuff, like everyone is being used. You
Yes,
know,
a
like
It's all smoke screens.
yeah, like whenever you hear like so and so reporting that, I hear this team is absolutely, it's a lock, they're taking this guy at 2. you just know that that's coming from like some team that's trying to like up the trade value, so when someone calls, they're like, oh no, we're taking this guy. Or when you hear like Shadur Sanders, like you don't know how much of that is people later on in the rounds, trying to lower the price if they want to trade up.
Yeah.
And it's always funny to me though, like even guys who are like really experienced as far as like the reporters and have been doing this for a long time, they'll still get like snippy with each other on like social media if like someone questions their thing and they're like, "Oh no, this is whatever." It's like you've done this for a long time. You know the game that they're playing. So like
Yeah.
you might have a source that's saying this or that is going to happen, but if someone challenges you on it, like I don't know, you think you're back and be like, "Yeah, I know." Like, yeah, someone's probably feeding me a bill of goods, but I don't care. Like I'm still cashing my check with NFL Network or ESPN or whatever it might be.
Yeah, it's like you
I'd
saw
have
it
no
this week.
desire to parse through that.
No,
Like, because what do you run with? Because you are being used all the time. And so it's like, well, do I not report anything? Because some of it's going to be right. But it's like, yeah, that's a very delicate dance.
well, I mean, at the end of the day, information is currency in that line of work, and so like there's a reason for all of it, and at the end of the day, you have to play the game. But it's like you even saw it this week with like these little things trickling out about maybe the Patriots will take Ashton Genchi, and it's like, no, they're not. That's just trying to like scare some team like the Bears into trading up for him, which like maybe that'll happen. But it's like even the Titans yesterday saying we are unanimous, we are sticking and picking at number one. For who? A quarterback that everyone says would be ranked seventh in last year's class? Like, you mean to tell me if the Saints come up to them and say, here are 3 first-round picks, they're not gonna like they're that sold on Cam Ward? Give me a break. Like I'm not saying that they're not right now totally planning on sticking and picking, but they're saying that, see if any team out there would be like, all right, screw it, let's throw in that extra first-round pick. Like, it's all everybody's lying.
Everyone has a price.
Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe not some years. I mean, when there's like a Trevor Lawrence or an Andrew Luck at the top of the draft, that's one thing. I guess everybody, if you give them like 10 first-round picks, but in general, those guys, the cost for them would be so prohibitive that they're essentially untouchable. But someone like Cam Ward, like, give me a break. Like, the Titans are, and you see these reporters putting stuff out. They are infatuated with Cam Ward. They are ready for a new era. They're this and that. I'm like, I'm not buying it. Not a guy who would be ranked below Bo Nix last year. Like,
Hey, the Broncos are pretty happy with Bo Nix.
yeah, okay, Mac Jones 2.0.
Whoa.
Yeah, I can see that.
All right. So, I think the first round from the Patriots' perspective at number 4 has been talked to death. And I also want to kind of stay away from trade scenarios because there's like literally infinite possibilities that you could go with there when you start talking about trading picks and future years and players and all that kind of stuff. So I'd kind of like to push past the first round today. We've talked all those kind of possibilities and intricacies to death. But I just want to go round by round, specifically 2 through 5. And get your guys' thoughts, like on any candidates that you think would be good for the Patriots to target with those picks. But then for also each round, like if you think there's like kind of a general idea of what they need to be targeting at that point. So just hop right into round 2. So in my opinion, round 2 is driven by where they go with that 4th overall pick. I think that if they use that 4th overall pick on a Will Campbell or an offensive lineman, then in round 2 they can look at maybe someone either on the defensive side of the ball or a wide receiver. Wide receiver wise, I've kind of targeted for rounds 2 and 3 the Iowa State wideouts, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Knoll. However, I mean, if they do end up, if Abdul Carter ends up falling to them, I think that he's a guy they can't pass on from everything that I've heard. So with that in mind, they can't come out of the top 40 picks in this draft without an offensive lineman. So then I think at that point, like in round 2, they would have to take the best offensive tackle that's left on the board. And it might be a player they like even less than Will Campbell. But I just don't think, I think it would be malpractice, so to speak, to get past pick number 38 or in the top 40 somewhere without having that offensive tackle. And I think maybe like the last like top 40 caliber left tackle, at least on the boards I was seeing, was a Connerly out of Oregon. But it's not really the player for me. It's just mostly that if they don't get an offensive lineman there in the first round, they don't have a choice. They got to take somebody, whoever it is, ranked highest on their board at tackle with their round 2 pick.
Can I set a close lock?
Sure.
Ozzie Trapillo, the tackle from Boston College,
He's on
is
mine.
going to be a Patriot.
In round 2, though?
So that's the thing. It's probably not round 2 because that would be a reach for him. I think they would take him in the 3rd round. But then it's like, all right, are you really putting your eggs in that basket? Because I don't think, even if they have their eyes set on him, I don't think you can go in and like have that be your top end offensive line addition. But the fact, I mean, we're bringing the band back with anyone that's ever had a connection to Mike Vrabel or the Patriots. And so you've got a guy who's just coached by Doug Marrone and has been working with Scarnecchia. Like, he's going to be a Patriot.
I would throw up in my mouth a little if that happened. But I did highlight him because I know that the BC dudes are like really,
Always.
everyone is so pumped about Ozzie Trapillo. So, yeah, okay.
That's not even an endorsement of it. That's just saying, like,
I know.
look at all of the factors pointing in that direction. That's just how they operate.
It's so tired, but you're right.
And his dad played in the NFL too, so I'm sure that's a thing too.
Yeah, I have him actually as my round 3 pick for all the reasons you mentioned. So when we get to round 3, just skip me, I guess. But I don't have a tackle in with the round 2 pick. That said, I thought about it. I think, I mean, assuming it's Will Campbell or someone like that at number 4, or even if they trade back to like 8 and take Membao or Kelvin Banks, like all 3 of those guys have guard risk, if not just right tackle risk, which they already have Morgan Moses and Caden Wallace. And so I just think even if they take an offensive lineman with that first pick, like I do think a double dip could be in play. And in some respects, I think it's like it probably is what they should do, because they've kind of neglected it for so long that they should start like over prioritizing it, and it would raise the ceiling of next season's team immediately. So I do think there's a strong argument to do that if there's the right player there at 38. But for me, I went with Mason Taylor, the tight end out of LSU. Might be a reach, like he might be someone more who makes more sense in like the 40s or something, but. I know everyone gets, all obsessed with wideouts this time of the year, and I understand it, but, depending on the offense you're running or the quality of the player, like the tight end can be just as valuable, if not more so, than receivers in today's NFL, and especially in Josh McDaniels' offense, the way he likes to use tight ends. I know they're set with Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper, and Jaheim Bell's maybe like kind of a lottery ticket there, but probably not. So I know they're okay for this season, but long term, it's high time for them to bring in a young tight end. They've avoided it for so long, or I guess they tried a couple of times with the Devin Asiasis of the world, and it didn't work out. But I think if you get Drake May, one of these dynamic move tight ends that can be a weapon, up the middle on seam routes, or a go-to target to get first downs on 3rd down, like I think that's just as valuable as targeting the flashy boundary wideout prospect in the 2nd and 3rd round. So I like Mason Taylor. I think he's a son of Jason Taylor, and Zach Thomas is his uncle. So he's had a lot of good football people around him his whole life, and I think that would be a good pick for the Patriots.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty obvious wide receiver fit. I agree on the tight end part because, for one, I mean, Hunter Henry was imperative for the growth of Drake May because Drake May went to him a lot. He was probably his most reliable target, and Hunter Henry's 31, 32 now. Austin Hooper's around that age, so it's like you do need to start preparing for life without these guys. And between bringing McDaniels back and the fact that May really seemed to lead on Hunter Henry, I agree that you should kind of go that way. That said, I think that they're gonna go edge rusher and offensive lineman with the first 2 rounds, and it'll be dependent on if Abdul Carter falls to them at 4. I think it's obvious that they take him. It seems like the consensus is Cam Ward and Travis Hunter 1 and 2. But then that's where it's get like most teams say Abdul Carter 3, or most mocks say Abdul Carter 3. If they go with Will Campbell, then you have some options in the second round. I'm losing them right now. JT Tuamalo from Ohio State. Who is the other one I was looking at? Another BC kid, Donovan Ezio Raku. I forget how to pronounce that. But around the end of the first round, and as you get into the second, there are kind of like that mid tier of edge rushers. So because of the variability with wide receivers and the fact that this is a team that has not historically done a great job drafting wide receivers, like you're not going to get a top end guy at that point. So you might as well roll the dice. I mean, if you're getting Ozzie Trapillo in the third round, you're not getting a receiver then. But, I think that handling upfront, handling the trenches, offensive tackle, edge rusher is probably the safest way to go. Because, I mean, when was the last time they hit on a first or second round receiver?
I also think this could be like one of those spots that we always see where someone who's considered a first round talent, somewhere in the 20s, doesn't get drafted in the first round, and then leading into the next day it becomes like, who's going to take him? Who might trade up like 3 or 4 spots? And so someone like Michael Williams, the Georgia edge rusher, who like I've seen him mocked in the mid 20s, I've seen him mocked to the Eagles at number 32. It feels like every year like there's one of those guys who slips out, right? And then a team like trades up, like what last year, I think it was the Bills traded up for Keon Coleman, right? Or someone in that range. So like I'll be on the lookout for the Patriots to, if one of those sort of traitsy edge rushers or even a tackle prospect slips out and they feel like they got to package that 38th pick and one of the third rounders or something to move up and get them. I think that certainly could be in play this year.
Yeah, the more that I've dug in, and as much as I'm not in love with Will Campbell, the player, I've become more and more of a fan of taking him with that fourth pick because I just think that addressing that tackle need early gives them so much flexibility. Sorry. I just think that addressing that tackle need early gives them so much flexibility starting with this pick because, like you mentioned, there are a number of edge rushers who could be available. I think there's options, not great options for wide receiver, but there's options at wide receiver. And then also, I also see a lot of like interior defensive linemen with a varied set of skills. The one who stood up out to me specifically because he seemed to be the one who was the kind of the highest rated like pass rushing interior defensive lineman in that range was Darren Harmon at Oregon, and I thought that was just a little bit of a different wrinkle there, specifically as interior lineman who could generate pressure against the pass. But yeah, the more I've looked at it, I was like, you know what, maybe I like Mason Graham a little bit better, or like an Abdul Carter if he's there. But once you do that, like they're really locking themselves in for the second and the third round and even the fourth round of like starting to have to address the needs.
Yeah, and I definitely think to your point about the pass rushing defensive tackle, like I think that could be something they target earlier than people think, like maybe with that second, third round pick, just because, like, you got to believe that that's what Mike Vrabel's scheme is all about. That's why they traded Devon Godchaux. They want these pass rushing defensive tackles, and with the future of Christian Barmore uncertain, I think they can't just be Milton Williams or bust. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if they take one of those guys before the fifth round. But to your point about the tackle thing, like that's why I think ultimately, like I don't love Will Campbell at 4 either. But it's like I just don't think they really have a choice. Like I think they gotta improve the offensive line one way or the other. If he turns out to be a really good guard, okay, it's not but regardless, he raises the level, like the ceiling of the team or the floor of the team immediately at a spot that they absolutely need. Try him at tackle for a season. If at the end of it, you go another direction, so be it. But I think they kind of have to do it, whether it's him or Membo or somebody else. But it feels like it's going to be Will Campbell.
Yeah, I forget if this was when Mike was here or I made this point with you too, Dakota. But one of the things I kind of look at for a comparison as it relates to the Will Campbell thing is the Chargers taking Joe Alt last year. And I feel like the Patriots the last few years in the draft have been, I mean, we talk about dart throwing all the time and the fact that it always is a dart throw, but it seems like they've just been trying to like land talent. They're not trying to build a team. But now that you have Drake May in place and he's presumably your quarterback of the future, you can draft according to where like I don't know, where even if Will Campbell isn't the best overall player, he fits you best in the sense that he's an investment in Drake May. Like Justin Herbert could never stay upright, so they drafted Joe Alt at 3 or 4 or 5, wherever he was, and he became, he was one of the better options in the NFL at his position. And so I feel like if you do something like that with Will Campbell, it's like, yeah, I agree. There's probably a flashier player. I mean, I would rather Travis Hunter falls to them and you have someone who's electric and myriad options you can use with him. But we know that keeping Drake May upright is going to be important, and that will open up a lot of things. The Reeds is all boats, analogy or cliche, whatever you want to say. But even if it's not the most exciting pick, I do think it is a sound long-term investment, especially because you played your way out of the first overall pick.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say about this too is it's been too many years in a row where they've done like there's not much difference between these guys in the back half of the first round and guys in third round. Like we'll just target one of them. That's how you end up with Caden Wallace or Yadni Kajust or people this year that say, well, take the Ashton Genty at 4 and then package picks to move back up into the back of the first round because one of those guys available back there might even be a better tackle prospect long term than a Will Campbell. And it's like I think they've been trying to get cute with that need for too long now that it's like just don't overthink it. If he doesn't work out, he doesn't work out. But like just take the best offensive tackle prospect available at that spot and hope it works out.
Yeah, I hear you. And now we're into round 3. This is where I got the Ozzy Trapillo pick.
Me too,
And
so.
I have to be aware of my own bias too, because I think the same way that there's so many like BC folks are waving the flag for Ozzy Trapillo, I also have to be aware of myself being, rejecting him outright, knowing nothing about him just because I'm sick of the maroon and gold wearing, dorks, saying that they got to take him. But yeah, whatever. He's probably going there either 69 or 77, bearing in mind that like we're not going to get to this point of the draft with no movement whatsoever. So again, like this is just, for the sake of the exercise, assuming they're still going to be roughly there in the third round. I also think that this is the place where, if they do not take a wide receiver in the second round, they still could look there. From what I was looking at the two Iowa State guys, Higgins is bigger, Knoll is faster. They're both sure-handed, but it sounds like Jalen Noel he might be a better route runner. He might be quicker, and he might be available there in round 3. So I think there's a chance he might actually be the better of those two. So if they do, want to look at a wide out there, and then I also don't know that. I know we've kind of like not talked about defensive backs because it's like, well, Christian Gonzalez is there. I don't think that just means like, there's 3 other or 4 other, if depending on the defense you're playing, defensive backs that you're playing there. And Kevin Winston from Penn State, really stood out to me because his grades were equally good versus the run and the pass. And I think just that flexibility could be really good, especially when you have what seems like a shutdown corner in Gonzalez, to have a safety or some sort of, flex defensive back in there who can play every single down equally well.
Yeah, I think again I have Trapillo at that spot too, and the main reason being, as we talked about, like familiarity has been the theme of this off or one of the themes of this offseason, where like it seems like every player or coach there's connections to Vrabel or McDaniels or the Patriots, and so you would be keeping with that, and I know it's a different head coach, but like last year they hired Tyler Hughes who was coaching at Washington when Jalen Polk was there, and then they overdraft Jalen Polk in the second round. And I have to believe Tyler Hughes' input has something to do with that. So could something similar happen with Marone and Trapillo? So I just think like it would be the least surprising outcome. But yeah, I'm with you. I thought about a receiver in that spot too, but at the end of the day, I went with Trapillo. If it is, I like the defensive back thing, but to me, I do think they're set at corner, especially after signing Carlton Davis. I like Alex Austin as sort of that depth corner, and I think Marcus Jones, you worry about the injury stuff, but I think he was really good last season on the whole. For me, I would be looking at trying to get a sort of a traditional free safety because that's kind of becoming the second version of the tight end neglection, where it's like, the Rob Gronkowski left, they never filled the hole. Devin McCourty left, they haven't filled the hole. They keep getting these like strong safety types and hybrid safety types that can make a lot of plays, but they haven't gone out and gotten a true free safety that can sort of like really protect the back of the defense. And so I wonder if that could be a spot they target early, especially given how prominent of a role safeties had in the Titans defense when Mike Vrabel was there. But that's still probably something they would go after later, I would think.
Yeah, I think they have 4 top 100 picks, and I think they're going to end up with 2 offensive linemen, an edge rusher, and a receiver. Once you get to the third round, I feel like there's like a million receivers who are all on the same tier. So at that point, it's just kind of like a lottery ticket. There's Jalen Royals, there's Kyle Williams, who's Jack Beck. Yeah, Jack Beck was another one who I had on from TCU. And so at that point, it's just kind of like, I don't know, you take the guy that you like the best and hope that he's a scheme fit, because it's like they just, you know, Diggs will be around for a little bit, but not forever. And they really just have such a low ceiling receiver room right now that, like, to the point I was making earlier about just trying to find talent, it's like I think at a wide receiver you can probably do that now. Is like, all right, you have a more sure-handed option in Stephon Diggs now. It's like, let's just roll the dice and see if we can find someone for a change. But at that point, I think there's just such a swath of options in the middle that it's kind of like it's hard to be particularly inspired by any of the options. But that said, I think that the offensive line is such a pivotal part that no matter what, they're walking away with 2 linemen, and including one, that is going to be a sure thing tackle. But I think that there's just they had so many different line combinations last year that I feel like the thing that they need the most is some semblance of stability there. And some of that's health related, and you won't be able to control all of that. But it's like, I'm tired of the hybrid offensive linemen. They need to find some guys who actually fit into defined roles. And so I think that will end up being the objective, in the top 100 there. So I think all that to say, I think the third round in particular is probably going to be spent on another offensive lineman, whether that's Trapillo or not, and a receiver.
I also think like one of the reasons it's so hard to talk about this is like maybe a little bit easier if Mayo was still here and it was still like Mayo and Elliott Wolf sort of leading everything, or even if it was Belichick. But it's like we just don't know how Vrabel and Cowden feel about some key players, that factor into this. Like, how do they feel about Caden Wallace? Like, do they think if nothing else, he has a shot to be the right tackle? How do they feel about Marte Mapu? Do they think he can be the free safety? Do they think Christian Barmore has a chance to come back? There's a lot of these guys that just you wonder how what do they think about Jalen Polk?
Yeah.
And so how do they feel about Cole Strange at center? I know Mike Vrabel talked him up. I think Cole Strange can play center, but are they like no way? And if that's the case, would they then target a center more in like the round 4 range? There's just so many players, so many spots like that where it's so hard to know what they could do because you don't know how Vrabel and Cowden truly feel about the guys that are on the roster who have question marks but also promise.
But beyond just
I'm
the
glad
players, you also don't know how they feel like philosophically about stuff, and that was like one of the things like when I was talking about Winston is I don't know if they value a flexible defensive back. Belichick absolutely would.
Right.
Like guys who and maybe Vrabel is not going to care all that much about that. Or, when you're looking at the lineman, like, is he worried? Does he want, a rusher who can get to the quarterback or someone who kind of like sets the contain? So, yeah, you're right. Beyond just how he feels about the players themselves, we don't really know yet, like, what their philosophical environment is going to be.
Or how much Josh
That's
McDaniels has evolved, right? Like, is
yeah.
he as committed to certain things now as he was back then? We don't know that stuff either.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, McDaniels has shown a willingness to evolve. This is something I was. Oh, I was glad you brought up the point, Dakota, about not really knowing where any of these guys stand, because that's my biggest gripe with the whole Mayo debacle is they wasted a year. Like, I listened to Gerard Mayo every single week when he had his WEEI interview. And pretty much every time when they would be asking him these questions about the roster, these big picture questions, he's like, look, like, we're still kind of wrapping our arms around this roster and using this year to figure out what we have. And you figured out what you had under Gerard Mayo. You threw that year away. If they, so we're going to do what? Fact finding this year? Like, I guess the expectation is that Mike Vrabel has this clear vision and they're going to take off or whatever. It's like, you're right. He doesn't know what's on this roster firsthand outside of what everyone else is able to see. So they did themselves a massive disservice. And that might be more of like a media or a fan gripe than anything, because it's like, well, they did the right thing by firing Mayo and moving on and not just trying to make something work there. But at the same time, they absolutely wasted last year. And I think that does kind of set them back in a way for this draft, because it's just a very weird spot, a very influx spot for the organization right now.
I'm just making a note because that is a good point, and I want to get back to that.
Don't give John too much credit.
The salient point.
They
did waste that year. I mean,
he started out by saying you made a good point. So if
John,
he's saying you made a good point, I'm saying he made a good point. We're in a human centipede of good points and acknowledging them.
Yeah, John, you still want Yoshida in the lineup over Christian Campbell?
Oh my God! Yeah, do you want to talk about Trevor's story then? If we're going to do all these whatabouts,
really
okay. Thank
you. I was pro Trevor. I'm not doing this.
Okay. Now you said you didn't want to.
All right, we're going. Yeah, let's throw praise for Trevor's story on April 25th. Anyway, so
let's throw praise for Christian Campbell on April 20th.
In round 4. So here is where I, on the board that I was doing, I realized that in none of my first or second options, I had the Patriots taking an edge. As of this point, so this was a pretty academic exercise. I just went with who in that realm had the highest kind of grades as an edge, and it was Ashton. I don't know if it's Gillette or Galoti from Louisville, and that was just okay. Well, if they get to this point and they haven't taken an edge, which I don't necessarily think they will, I think they just gotta take what is the best there. From another standpoint, though, again, I tried to kind of like, the one is the straight and narrow, the other one is kind of like thinking out there along the nobody really knows path is Trevor Etienne from Georgia. Wasn't a gigantic receiver, but I noticed he had 33 targets and 32 receptions, which suggests to me that he has receiving potential. And that's something that the Patriots have kind of been looking for. So I think if you get into those mid rounds, if that is a wrinkle that they could add to the offense, I think that could be interesting.
I do think they go running back somewhere, maybe probably the 5th round. But the ETN thing is interesting because, like, look at how much they utilized Antonio Gibson last year because he's capable of splitting out and catching a pass. Like, if they are committed to Ramondre Stevenson, at least for this year, then they would be well advised to get a dual threat back or even just like a 3rd down passing back, because at that point, in the 4th or 5th round, that's what you're going to find anyways. But no, they definitely need to diversify that a little bit. So I do think the mid rounds is probably where they'll go for some of that. And to the point that we were making earlier about them adding tight ends, like, do you add a tight end? Do you add a wide receiver? Like, they might just add a lot of variety and try and have options at each position instead of being like, we are going to be a 2 tight end team and we're going to run everything through these guys, because I feel like in the past they've tried to pigeonhole themselves into that a little bit, to the point about when they drafted Ossie and Dalton Keene within like 10 picks of each other. It was like they clearly were trying to create a double tight end thing, and then Dalton Keene was always hurt and they didn't know how to use anyone, and Ossie stunk. And so, all of that. So, which is to say, it wouldn't be surprising that if they start going for some divergent skill sets just to give themselves a few options. So the ETN, he was one I had circled as well. I didn't realize the scope of his targets the way you just pointed out, Ben, but I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I actually have a pass catching back a little bit later. But yeah, with the 77th pick, I went Maryland receiver Ty Felton. And this is kind of one of those things where, like we said at the top, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I've watched a ton of Ty Felton tape, but I generally going into this when I had them taking their first receiver of the draft, whenever it is, I just prioritize size because they just got too many small guys. Um, and I know like playing on the boundary, it's not just about height. Like there are plenty of guys 6 feet or shorter who do a great job on the outside. But I just wanted to go over someone with height and length, and Felton has that. He's 6'1". He's a little light at 185. But it seems to be that's like a fair range where he's listed in a lot of big boards and a lot of mock drafts. So I think that that could be a good spot. It's also worth reminding that this is the 77th pick is the one they got for Matthew in the Matthew Judon trade, which like say what you want about Elliott Wolf, and he deserves a lot of the criticism. That is an insane trade that they got that asset for a Matthew Judon who can't even get a job right now. Might be completely washed.
Also, Matthew Judon, who was never going to play for the Patriots. Again, they had no leverage, so it's like they took him.
Yeah, I mean that's like I don't know, like and that's just like
that's the Flyers getting a third for Zach Ronaldo from Don Sweeney.
Yeah, well, right. You take advantage of a team that's desperate, that needs something, and has an immediate need and is desperate for it. I mean, that's what the Red Sox just did with the Quinn Priester trade. The Brewers were desperate for starting pitching help, and they somehow get like an interesting outfield prospect and the 33rd pick in the draft just because, the Brewers were desperate for starting pitching, and the Falcons were desperate for edge rushing help going into the year because their first pick got hurt. And you're able to get that 77th pick. I mean, there's so much they could do with it. I talked earlier about maybe moving up earlier in the second round if someone slips, or if they want to go back into the first round. Like that's a huge piece for them to have. So, but I had them sticking and picking and going Ty Felton.
Yeah, I will also admit I have not watched. I don't watch any Maryland not because of it. I hate the idea that Maryland is in the Big Ten. So anytime I turn on a game and Maryland is playing a Big Ten game, I'm disgusted.
I also just think they're a boring school. They're boring logo. They're a turtle. Like, I don't know.
Technically, it's a terrapin, but
I disagree with that. I thought when they were in the ACC, they were kind of like that scrappy, like punching up at the UNC and the Dukes of the world, along there in the Mid Atlantic. And I thought it was kind of fun. But now it's like
super douchey in lacrosse. Like I don't know.
It doesn't. They do not fit in with the Big Ten at all. I think it's just
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah, I have to say, I remember a few years ago getting incensed because I saw a take about how it was when UConn was being considered for the Big 12. And that would be a clunky fit no matter what. But UConn football needs to be in a conference. Anyways, someone was saying that
the Little East
They
Conference.
were like, Big 12 schools are really apprehensive about adding UConn because of like I need to find the exact verbiage, but it's like the caliber of facilities and this and that, and it doesn't have the national recognition. I was like, I need to double check who's in the Big 12. It's like UCF is in the Big 12. You're telling me UCF has more national recognition than UConn, the best basketball program, men's and women's in the country. So yeah, that was just whenever I see people bagging on conferences, I'm like, we have completely lost the plot with the conferences. Like, it's a way to streamline scheduling and nothing more at this point.
So those things I never think about the men's basketball or the football teams. I always think about like the stupid like women's soccer team that probably has to take like the cheapest charter bus possible, and they need to find a way to take it from Storrs, Connecticut to like Oklahoma State, or like fly commercial for these non-revenue sports, because like the football players, they're gonna get taken care of. Like the basketball players, it's gonna be like they ain't flying Paige Becker's commercial. You know what I mean? To go play at UCF, but like the men's gymnasts are gonna have to deal with like some like Amtrak or some BS like this to go play.
Oh, don't dump on Amtrak around Logan.
I love trains. I love trains. That I'd love if they took Amtrak everywhere.
I love trains too. I was on trains the last couple of weeks in Italy. Some fast trains, some slow trains. The trains on the
DC and Points North. DC and Points North. You should be taking Amtrak.
Okay, when the
Good hard pivot.
when when the men's soccer team is on an Amtrak to Memphis, I'll be sure to tell them they can call Logan Mullen.
You just
That
got to take it down to Charlotte and then you head due
they should be
west.
having the
You'll be
time of
good
their
to go.
lives. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take you down to Disney World sometime, John. We can go on the Magic Kingdom Railroad.
Yeah, I've been on that. Thank you.
It's a good experience.
Edaville Railroad, Logan over there.
We're so far off now from where we were. I don't even know how we ended up on.
Oh, you know
the
that?
Magic
Are you
Kingdom
talking about
Railroad.
the train park and what is the town called again?
It's like Carver, I think.
Yeah, but I know we're going way off topic now, but they're like that park, whatever it is, I've never been, but they're like either selling off a lot of their stuff or regardless, the King Richard's Fair is going there now.
Logan, it's your chance.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm a big King. I love
Yeah, that would entail me going to Carver, Mass, which I have very little to tell
I'm
you.
saying that train amusement park is now becoming like part train amusement park, part King Richard's Fair. They're like merging into one like next fall. So if you're a big,
I would just rather entirely a train park.
Yeah,
than
I'm
having
with you.
King Richard's Fair.
Dude,
I mean, is medieval
you ever been to
times
King
coming
Richard's
in
Fair?
and they're going by thirds, or what are we gonna do here?
I think it's like you'll walk in and like a lot of that train stuff will still be there, and then at a certain there'll be like a gated area or whatever, and you'll go in and this whole other massive area is King Richard's Fair. If you've never been to King Richard's Fair, you should go. It's a great time and great themed entertainment.
I
Some
go
good
every few
performances.
years and like I enjoy it, but it's so expensive and I don't know. It's like
It can be expensive.
the clientele is.
I admit
I'm
it
sure
gets
they're
big
fine
seats,
people.
but yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure they're fine people.
Yeah, the clientele, you run into people like Dakota, just man boys everywhere.
Just smashing mead and smoking cigarettes.
Round 5.
Yeah, you just got to get it right back on the tracks.
No, are we on round 4, 106?
No.
No, I think we've definitely gone through.
Yeah,
the
we're
first
we're on we.
I am
Oh, well,
prepared for it to be the 5th round.
I got well. Okay, then I'll quickly because then I've skipped one. I did 77 Ty Felton receiver out of Maryland, and in round
That's
4,
what started this, was talking about Maryland being in the ACC or the Big Ten.
in round 4, pick 106. I have Jeffrey Bassa, linebacker out of Oregon, just because I think they got to add linebackers too. I'm not sold on their linebacking group. I know Spillane's a good player, but he's 30 and got a lot of mileage. Vrabel loves speed at that level. Bassa seems to have that and has good coverage ability. So I think they got to get linebacking help too because they're pretty thin there. So I have Jeffrey Bassa with the 106 overall pick. Now on to round 5.
Round 5.
I'll just keep going. Round 5. I have R.J. Harvey, running back out of UCF, for a lot of the passing down back stuff that we mentioned earlier. And, the more you read about him, he seems like a guy who, if nothing else, right away, he can sort of be that spark plug, gets open in a phone booth, receiving back with the upside to develop into more with a larger role with more experience a couple years down the line. So I think that's a good spot for them to target that need. But I'm sure this season, Antonio Gibson is still really good at that role, and it'd be hard to dip into his carries or his playing time. But regardless, I think they have to get someone else at that position.
Yeah, well, this is where I'm trying to be consistent here because
It's a challenge.
I get it is a challenge for me. Yeah, the goalposts always have to move for me. I think it's reasonable that they would take defensive back somewhere in the 5th round, probably in both spots. At this point, I have not, in my mocking here, have not taken a corner or a safety for that matter. So at that point, it's kind of like, take your pick. That's where I see them go, like Bilal Kone from Western Michigan, like, one of those smaller school guys, something like that. That's an area where I could see them kind of going is, once you get into the 5th round, you're at like the guys who are in the 20s in their position anyway. So, it wouldn't surprise me if they get someone who maybe has a little bit of kick returning ability, something like that. But I can see them shifting gears to the second, with the methodology that I'm using of they've loaded up on the offensive line the first 2 rounds. They've added at wide out or tight end. And then, if a running back's there in the fifth, they got 2 picks there, they get a running back or they get secondary or both. What's that look for?
Yeah, what's the
Dakota?
smirk for?
Just Logan saying the phrase with the methodology I'm using.
Well, I'm not going to say, there are 27 interior offensive linemen they could take, but I'm not going to say that because I just said they are going to take 2 in the first 100 picks. So you can't rail on me for not being consistent. And then when I'm consistent with something, freaking idiot, like, God, we should bring Mike back.
I'm definitely not railing on you.
Where are we? Okay. Okay, round 5.
Well, Dakota's back in the second round. So he's just going at whatever pace he
yeah,
wants.
he's talking. Yeah,
But God forbid I go in order and with
talking
some
about
level
Armand
of,
Membu.
structure.
So interestingly, I think maybe because I was a little early with, looking at guys like running backs and those sort of things, defensive backs earlier in the rounds. I went much more traditional in round 5. I was looking at a lineman, either offensive or defensive. Defensive wise, I think maybe the best one that I saw that had a 5th round grade was Riley Mills out of Notre Dame. However, since he is Notre Dame, I think he's likely to get that Fighting Irish bump and go sooner than he actually should. Similar to like the Ozzie Trapillo to the Patriots sort of pick. One who was not mentioned as much, but I thought was interesting was J.J. Pegues out of Ole Miss, interior lineman, ex-tight end who played every single defensive line position. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Again, like not knowing how much positional versatility factors in for Vrabel and Elliott Wolf. And then on the offensive side, offensive line at this point gets really difficult for me as, a layman to tell the difference between who's best because everyone, it's like, especially an interior offensive lineman, I think at some point they're going to take an interior offensive lineman. But like everyone is like, well, they're undersized or they've been converted from another position or, inexperienced, something like that. So I didn't have a specific name per se, but I just kind of have asterisk interior O lineman TBD because I think that one of those guys, based on their evaluations, their meetings, they might address that at this point.
I also think you're far more likely to hit a starting caliber player in the 5th round if you're going like offensive line versus a skill position. So that is the argument against loading up on offensive line in the earlier rounds is like, especially if you think you're just going to end up with a guy who's probably going to be a guard anyways, you might as well just wait until the 4th, 5th, 6th round and take a guy who will be an actual interior offensive lineman.
Yeah, I also similarly with the second 5th round pick, the 171st, I just have like new backup quarterback generally. I gave it to Riley Leonard out of Notre Dame, but like any sort of player in that spot. Just in that like the second, 5th round pick or the 6th round pick. I think everybody, a lot, or not everybody, but a lot of fans are always like, why would you do that when you have Drake May? Or similarly, when the Patriots took Zappy, it's like you have Mac Jones. Why are you wasting a 5th round pick on a quarterback? But it's like you just you can never have too many quarterbacks or throw too many darts at that position. I think if you get a backup of the future, great. Or if you get someone who maybe shows a little bit more, and you can trade him like you did Joe Milton, hopefully for more, great. I just think you can never have too many quarterbacks. I'd rather have roll the dice on a quarterback at this spot, regardless of who they have as the starter, than going and trying to take some swaggy, traitsy receiver who's probably going to suck. So that's my thing.
They have enough traitsy receivers. It's
Right.
like don't waste you have a lot of guys who probably are going to start grading out to be like 6th or 7th round picks in your receiver room right now. So
There's also like a lot of you know, I people I've talked to or just stuff that I've read. Like I know, especially these days, after round 5, it's just generally seen as most of the players at that point and beyond, or they're in the same sort of talent level as undrafted free agents because so many guys are staying in college for NIL. That a lot of the players who are coming in and in that range, they're all so interchangeable, more so than ever. Like they were before, but even more so now. That you're just kind of like starting your undrafted free agent process earlier in round 5. So I think why not take a quarterback in that spot?
Interesting. All right. So now, kind of want to talk broadly. No offense to like the 6th and 7th rounds, but at that point,
Kicker.
Yeah, we're basically just picking names out of a hat. This is a very yeah. I was looking at the names. This is
the
a
last
very
kicker. Chad Ryland. They drafted. Sorry.
Ryland, yeah. This is a very
I have a
Jalen
Chad Ryland or
and
Justin Rowarser
okay.
rant that I'll
Oh,
say.
I bet you do.
Yeah, but not today. Not today.
Okay.
No, I was going through the names. This is a very Jalen and Riley heavy draft. But the problem is they're all spelled differently, so I like try to do the Control F. But the problem is I ran into a lot of creative ways to spell Riley. I was not aware of those. So yeah, that's my prediction for the later rounds is that they'll come out of this with either a Jalen or a Riley, someone with one of those variations of the name. But my question for you guys, to kind of cap us off here today, is looking at it from a 30,000-foot perspective, what is the key to a successful day for the Patriots? And kind of coming back to what Logan was saying when I said he made a good point for once in his life. Not just last year, but I think the last 2 years, if you're a Patriots observer, those have been 2 wasted years of your football life. Like no progress was made, nothing was learned besides the fact that this was not really a premier franchise anymore. And at the very least, I think the movement has now moved towards, well, we're going to have relevant football in one way, shape, or form, even if it is not playoff caliber football being played. So with that in mind, I think successful draft weekend, they need to come out of this with at least 2 offensive linemen. One who can start run it right away and one who can contribute in one way, shape, or form. And beyond that, I almost don't care. Like they need so many different things that as long as they get at least 2 playable offensive linemen out of this, they can come out with a outside linebacker, or a strong safety or whatever it might be, because it's something that will bolster them somewhere. Even if it's somewhere where they're decent now, they're not really good anywhere. And anything that will move them towards really good, regardless of what area of the game it's in, I'll take that as a win.
I'm just gonna speak quickly because unfortunately I have the same exact take. Ben is competent offensive lineman, which that was obviously a theme for me throughout this. But it's whether it's Will Campbell or someone else, they need a legitimate day one starter that they can put at tackle. And then after that, it's yeah, I don't really care because there are holes all across the roster, which they did fill in a lot of ways, especially on defense and free agency. But it's if they can shore up the offensive line, I think that's the number one thing that is preventing them from being at least competitive for a wild card spot.
Yeah.
So I just don't want them to overthink it. Would be a
Yeah.
success to me. Don't do anything that off the wall because you're desperate.
Yeah, I think for me, it's tough. How do you say what's a successful day? Is it is it looking at it in hindsight 3 years down the road, or is it in the immediate aftermath? It's hard to say what that is. But for me, it's just raise the floor of the offensive line, not necessarily the ceiling, because you don't know if you're going to be able to do that. Who knows how these guys will max out, but just raise the floor. And I just think the clearest way to do that is wherever that first pick is, if they trade back a few spots or stay at 4, use it on an offensive tackle prospect, and maybe do the double dip. I know I had Mason Taylor in that second round spot, but I think there's a strong case to be made for double dipping just to give yourself extra insurance in case that first pick winds up being a guard or right tackle. Take someone who has left tackle projectability. So just when you come out of that, you're we feel at least a lot better that one way or another the offensive line won't suck this year. We don't know if it'll be great because who knows, but you can reasonably expect it to not suck. And beyond that, I think like you said, the rest is gravy. But if they come out of the day confidently feeling they accomplished that goal, then I think it's a win.
I would love to see, like, as it relates to the offensive line, since we keep hammering this, it's like I would love to see some of these guys who are in starting roles just be very good backups. Like Vidarian Lowe, I can live with him if he's going to be one of your first tackles off the bench or your second unit guy. But that's the thing is, it's like they have useful offensive linemen for like a second unit. And so if they get two guys who are useful, I feel like you start raising the value of some of these other guys because you don't have to have Badarian Lowe or whoever out there for 90% of the offensive snaps. So yeah, that's a big one for me. I think a lot rides on that.
I also just think like from a selfish standpoint, like on the draft as a whole, just don't do any head scratchers. Just like for once have a draft that it seems like the Ravens always have or the Eagles always have, where the next day people are like, they did it again. They got like the best player available at that spot. They got the best value every time and at players who make sense for them. And again, who knows how those draft classes age? Like I'd love to look back at all these Ravens draft classes where right after the draft is over, people say they smashed it, and then who knows how they ended up being. But just for once, like no head scratchers, no Jalen Polk in the second round where everyone says it's an overdraft, no Cole Strange in the first round where everyone says it's a dumb pick. Um, just no weirdness, so I don't have
Yeah.
to be inundated with controversy.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. There's always something way too far off the board with them.
Yeah, and like you thought maybe that wouldn't be the case post Belichick, but it was again last year with the Jalen Polk thing. It wasn't not just because he didn't end up performing well, but even in the moment, a lot of people said like that's like more of a third round guy at best, and a lot of
It
people, and then at the Javon Baker pick, you were reading all this stuff, people saying he was off most teams' boards because of the off field stuff. So like, just no head scratchers.
it does make me wonder then, like, especially if they get an offensive lineman early on, if they do just try the best player available thing. Like we've been saying, they have so many holes on the roster. So, like, unless the best player available there is a quarterback or something you really don't need, it's like, why not just go that route and be like, yeah, sure. But that also flies in the face of my theory about like actually building a team now as opposed to just trying to load up on talent.
They do
So,
have holes, but I also think it's overstated. Like they definitely have holes on the offensive line, but at every other position group, like especially on defense, like there are good both established players and players who maybe are promising and could turn into more. I mean, I don't really and receiver, right? The receiver's the other one where you're like obviously they need help there, but there's also good players like Stephon Diggs and maybe Jalen Polk turns into something. But beyond offensive line and receiver, like I don't know how many like brutal holes there are where like they would have to go into this trying to draft for need. I think if they figure out the offensive line thing with the fourth pick and maybe double dip, beyond that, I think they can just draft for best player available. I don't know why they should be panicking at all the other spots. I don't think they're that
Yeah.
far off as other people think they are.
Yeah. To to both of your guys' points, I don't think they have players that like don't belong in the NFL.
No, I don't
You
either.
know, and I think that 2 years ago, Belichick's last year, there were some players that they had. I mean, starting with the quarterbacks who were not professional football players. But now, I look back. I know this is like really like sepia toned glasses that I'm looking back here, but like, who would have thought, going into the year like 2000, 2001, that like Troy Brown would turn into 100 reception wide receiver, or that like Teddy Bruschi is a little undersized converted lineman linebacker would end up being a fulcrum of multiple championships. So, I do think that there is that we have to be careful of situation impacting what we think of individual players, and there is a world in which these guys become very useful players if they're used by a coaching staff that knows its rear end from its elbow.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
my thing about like they have guys who are playing in bigger roles than they should be in. And so that's where, yeah, the coaching comes in and obviously roster building and acquiring more talent. But yeah, I can be a little critical of the amount of talent on the roster just because the last 2 years I haven't seen it. So it's like, yeah, I can see where it's like, all right, maybe there is something to Jalen Polk, but it's like, show me. I can't go off of what I know right now.
Yeah, I think that's the one of the most like overlooked things in all sports really, but I think especially football and baseball is like after every offseason, there's never much conversation on the variable of internal development, right? Like we said, like last year, like we talked about it going into the Red Sox season, like all these variables. What if Tristan Cassis turns into 280 with 35 homers, right? And it's not happening right now, but like that's a huge thing. Or what if Trevor Story goes off, right? And with the Patriots, it's like, going into last year, like or after last season, not a lot of things went right, but there were some things that were like, I think Marcus Jones now, like I feel good about him as the slot cornerback, and that's a big role, right? I feel good about him there. There were guys who showed you that they do belong, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if like halfway through this year we're like, oh no, Caden Wallace can play, right? Or last year's version of or this year's version of Keyshawn Booty, who where you're like, well, he's not a star, but I do think he can play, and there's a role for him. I'm sure there are going to be players like that on this year's team. It's just you can't obviously bank on that. You never know who that's going to be, but you can almost bank that there will, or guarantee that there will be a few guys like that every year.
So, how will you guys be spending the draft?
I'll watch
I'll
tomorrow.
cash out after the Patriots. I think I have no interest staying up that late for that.
I am working Friday, so I'm on for day two. So I will probably watch it. I always keep it on passively, like even when after the Patriots pick, like I watched them draft May last year, and I'm just kind of like, all right, whatever. I'll catch up on everything else. So I'll probably take it a little easy tomorrow night, knowing that I have to be locked in Friday.
I think I might. I think I might make it to like mid-teens just to see if the Patriots or someone does something interesting and moves up there. But I'm not going to wait around to like the 20s. I don't think I can do that.
I'm invested in all the rounds more than I have been in years because just the last few years of Belichick, I was in such a malaise. I didn't believe that any of the players were going to pan out. And then last year, I just didn't have any faith that once I was sure that they took Drake May, I was like, okay, I don't think that this group that's in there, although Elliot Wolf is still around, I was like, I don't think that they're going to get anything worth me sticking around and paying attention for. But this year, I'm actually interested for all the reasons you guys have talked about, not just what they're going to do it for, but like to get a sense, like what do we suggest that Vrabel is going to be doing for building his team here for the next, 5, 6, however many years. So, I'll be interested. Will I be locked in constantly? No, but I'll be checking my phone a lot more than I would have been in the past, let's say, 4 to 6 years.
Yeah, right.
That
Like,
is a very fair point. I
yeah, like
don't
what is their draft
automatically
identity?
assume everyone they pick is a bust.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see like, and that just at the draft as a whole, like what is their draft identity? Like, right away, if they do that Ashton Genty move, which I don't think they're going to do, but if they do something like that, that's you'd learn a lot about them just with that one pick. Or if they do trade up to like 19, if Tet McMillan falls and they move up to do something like that would you'd learn a lot, and it would be interesting for sure.
You started to see it in free agency with the moves they made. So
Yeah, but even that, I do think I don't know how much I'm gleaning from that because I think a lot of the free agency was about just raising the floor of the team and getting some professionals in the building and just sort of resetting a little bit. Like I don't know if I can come away from this offseason thinking like, oh, every year they're just going to target retreads or players they're familiar with or players they have connections to. I think they want to go into this year be much better than last year. Just compete, establish the culture, and one of the safest ways of doing that is just getting guys in the building that you know what you're getting. That you're not throwing a lot of darts, you're not taking chances on personalities you don't know. I think so I think them doing that in year one makes a lot of sense. I don't think that necessarily means that that's what they're going to do, going forward each offseason. But if they do make some crazy trade or crazy, like aggressive pick in the draft, I think that would be like, okay, that's how this group's going to operate. So.
It will be interesting to watch. Logan, Dakota, thanks for being with us. Everyone watching, thanks for spending the time with us. We will see what they do, and then we will be back here next week to talk about what they did and offer our unexpert opinions on why we think that they're all idiots. So thanks for joining us at NPC Sports Podcast. I've been Ben.